Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the wind-lashed hills and rain-soaked villages of medieval Scotland. The year doesn't really matter. It could be 1250 or 1421, or any point in that long stretch of centuries, where life didn't change much except for the names of the lords taking your grain. You're not a noble, not a monk, not a bard spinning tales beside the hearth. You're just you, a villager. Probably underfed, probably overworked, definitely cold. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up wet. Not soaked exactly, but everything around you carries that unmistakable Scottish damp, your straw-stuffed bedding, your threadbare wool tunic, the underside of the thatched roof just above your head. It drips, sometimes from condensation, sometimes from rain. The wind howls through gaps in the walls and the air smells of sheep smoke and mould. You slept on the floor again. Technically there's a raised wooden platform that someone once called a bed, but the slats creak like a dying cow and one leg is shorter than the others. And let's face it, lying directly on the floor at least means you won't roll off. The hut is one room. You share it with your sister, her husband, their baby, and possibly a few mice who consider themselves tenants. There are no windows, just a hole near the top to let smoke out. The smoke doesn't leave quickly, though. It lingers like a nosy aunt curling around your face as you sit up and rub the crust of sleep from your eyes. You cough. Everyone coughs. It's the normal way to wake up here. You scratch your head, dislodging a louse or two, and wrap yourself in a rough wool blanket. It used to be brown. Now it's sort of everything-coloured stained from smoke sweat and the occasional visit from a leaky roof. You shuffle across the packed dirt floor. The hearth is a smudge of grey ash and one half-alive coal. You breathe on it, coaxing it into a faint glow, then toss on some peat. Wood's too expensive, and besides, trees are rare around here. The peat catches slowly with a smell halfway between burned grass and wet socks. You hold your hands to it anyway. Warmth is warmth, even if it leaves your fingers black and your lungs sore. Historians still argue whether early medieval Scottish homes were truly this dismal, or if some modern reconstructions exaggerate the gloom. But what's not in dispute is the moisture. Damp was your daily companion. Clothes never fully dried, leather warped, grain spoiled, skin cracked, festered and blistered, especially in winter, which in this part of the world can feel like half the year. You glance around the room. The woven straw mats on the wall are supposed to keep out the wind. They flutter unconvincingly. The baby's crying. Your brother-in-law mutters something and rolls over. You take that as your cue to start the day, or at least to stand up and pretend your joints aren't made of rust. Outside, the world greets you with a blast of cold air and drizzle. Of course it's raining. You don't even look surprised anymore. The sky's a flat grey blanket and the hills in the distance are barely more than shadows. Your boots, more like sacks tied around your feet, sink slightly into the mud as soon as you step out. You step carefully around puddles that could be 2 inches or 2 feet deep. One wrong move and you're limping for a week with a twisted ankle. That's the thing out here. Everything is a hazard. Even walking. Some mornings you can hear the village cockerel. Not today. Either it froze overnight or someone ate it. Roosters are loud, but they're also delicious. In the fields beyond the hut, smoke rises from other peat fires. You can smell a hint of something cooking barley, probably. Maybe a boiled onion if someone was lucky at the market. Your stomach growls. You pull your cloak tighter, though it's barely more than a damp rag with a hood, and tell yourself again that you'll dry out by noon. You won't. The mud is winning. You squelch forward with each heavy slurping step, trying not to lose your makeshift footwear to the soggy earth. Your boots, if you can call them that, are scraps of tanned cowhide wrapped around your feet and tied with coarse woolen string. They're stiff when dry, useless when wet, and today of course they're soaked through before you've taken 10 steps. You pass the communal path that winds between huts, livestock pens and half-collapsed sheds. There's no proper road here, just a vaguely trodden line of muck. The older villagers say the Romans once laid stone roads through the highlands straight as a spear, but none came this far north. And if they did, the stones are long buried under centuries of peat and hoofprints. To get anywhere you trudge. To the fields, to the stream, to the woods if you dare. Even the kirk a mile away means a 2-hour shuffle through wind and wet and ankle-deep filth. Everyone complains about it. Everyone still goes. Fear of sin travels faster than foot rot. It's raining sideways now. Your hood flaps against your face, useless against the cold drizzle that seems to fall both from the sky and up from the ground somehow. Your breath fogs the air, mingling with the mist. Visibility drops to 20 paces. Perfect weather for slipping or getting ambushed, but you keep going. You nod to an old man dragging a wooden sled loaded with damp kindling. He grunts back, teeth clenched around a stick of smoked fish. Or maybe just a stick. Either way, it's lunch. Mud gets everywhere. In your ears, your boots, even your dinner. The fields you work a little better. Their thin soil, stretched over rock, refusing to grow anything useful, unless bullied with blood, sweat and prayer. When it's not raining, the wind picks up, strong enough to knock chickens over or carry away your hat. You used to chase it. Now you let the wind win. There are no wheels here. Carts bog down fast. Most heavy loads are dragged by hand on sledges or crude travois made of poles. Horses, not for your sort. You might see one once a month ridden by a priest or a laird's man tall in the saddle and dry above the mire. You envy him and curse him at once. Historians still argue whether daily travel was truly this abysmal, or if the accounts we have come from moments of unusual hardship. But ask anyone who lived here, and they'd probably say, unusual hardship is just what we called Tuesday. Your destination this morning is the barley field, if you can call a 3-acre patch of rocks and weeds a field. You and your sister's husband are meant to prep it for planting. Again. You did it last year and the year before. The yield barely fed the household, and half the grain went straight to the laird's storehouse anyway. You spot a small wooden cross stuck in the ground near a thistle patch. Someone buried a sheep here last week. Died from bloat or poison hemlock. You make a mental note not to graze the new lambs nearby. A goat bleats from the hill, you hope it's yours. The village dog's scrappy half-wild mutts trail behind you, hoping for scraps. You hiss at one that gets too close. It growls, but backs off. It knows the game, everyone's hungry, but biting the hand that might feed you is a risky gamble. A raven circles above. Just one. They say it's a sign of bad luck or that someone's about to die, but then again it's medieval Scotland. Someone's always about to die. You finally reach the edge of the barley plot, where a primitive fence of woven branches leans drunkenly. A scarecrow slumps in the middle, stuffed with damp straw and wearing an old bonnet. It doesn't scare anything, but the birds seem to respect tradition. You set down your hoe, really just a stick with a crude blade, and begin hacking at weeds. The earth here clings to your tool heavy and wet. Every stroke feels like pulling teeth. You can hear your brother-in-law arriving behind you, cursing the mud and talking to himself. Something about his back, something about the laird. You nod, grunt, and keep digging. That's the rhythm of work here, misery shared in silence. Now and then your eyes drift to the hills. Mist coils around the peaks like ghostly fingers. Somewhere out there are wild boars. Wolves. Maybe raiders too, though they haven't come this season. Still, you never truly stop watching the horizon. Work continues until your arms ache and your toes have gone numb inside their soggy cocoons. But the rain hasn't let up, and neither can you. A few roots, a few clean patches of soil. That's the best you'll get before dark. You spit into the wind, adjust your cloak and bend back down. You drag yourself home like a man twice your age, though you're barely into your 20s. Your hands are blistered from the hoe, your boots feel like wet sacks of rocks, and you're not sure if the ache in your lower back is from digging or just existing. You're greeted by smoke again. Inside your hut, the air is so thick you could chew it. Your sister's already lit the peat fire, or rather she's tried. The smoke swirls lazily around the room, refusing to rise. You cough into your sleeve and blink through the haze. Your eyes sting and your lungs tighten. You sit on a log stool near the hearth, rubbing your hands near the small, reluctant flame. This is the only heat you'll get today. Maybe this week. Peat burns slow, gives off more smoke than warmth, and smells like someone lit a wet blanket on fire. But it's all you've got. Historians still argue whether peat use was more common in the highlands than in the lowlands, or whether it was simply whatever was closest and cheapest to burn. Either way, it was the everyday reality of fuel. Here, wood was scarce, and coal was for towns you'd never see. You shift, trying to find a position where your back doesn't protest, but the hut isn't built for comfort. Its roof is low, and the walls seem to lean inward slightly, like they're conspiring to collapse. The rafters above you are black with centuries of soot. Cobwebs droop from the corners, and a small bird flutters out through the smoke hole as if to say, even I've had enough. Your tunic smells like the inside of the hearth, now charred wool, sweat and earth. It's thick and scratchy, hand-stitched from coarse fabric that started as sheep and somehow got worse. You've patched it 6 times. You'll patch it again. Someone tries to open the door, your nephew covered in mud, his nose running like a leaky wineskin. He runs in barefoot shouting about the neighbour's cow breaking loose. No one moves. If the cow's not actively on fire or inside the house, it can wait. Your sister stirs something in the hanging pot over the fire. It's barley gruel. Again, you're not sure if this is breakfast, lunch or dinner. The meals blur together. It's always some variation of the same thing, barley oats, maybe cabbage, if the last frost didn't kill the stalks. The pot bubbles weakly. The scent is bland and heavy like soggy paper. You remember when a travelling monk passed through and gave you dried herbs. You sprinkled some on your food and felt like a king. But the herbs are gone, and the monk hasn't returned. Maybe wolves got him. You take a bowl and slurp the gruel down. It's hot, which is nice. It's also grey and the texture of mud, which is less nice. A few unground husks crunch between your teeth. No one talks. The fire cracks. Someone sniffs. The baby burps. Outside, the rain hasn't stopped. It won't stop until the entire village moulds into a single sentient swamp. There's a draught near the door. You shove a bundle of reeds against it. The wind whistles anyway. You stare into the fire, hypnotized by its flickering. The shadows dance against the blackened walls, and for a moment you imagine you're in a castle. A warm, dry one. With bread. Real bread. You blink and realize your bowl is empty. You're still hungry. Quirky detail. Sometimes villagers would hang dead birds in the rafters to cure them with the smoke. They said it added flavour. You wonder if the vague shape dangling above you used to be a pheasant, or maybe a boot. Later you'll need to fetch more peat. The stack outside is nearly gone, and there's a patch in the bog that's supposed to be easy digging. That just means it won't swallow you entirely, only up to the knees. You wish you had more straw for the bedding. The current pile is more hay than straw, and it itches like a curse. Your skin has turned red in places, flaky in others, but you'll sleep in it tonight anyway. No point in complaining. There's no one to complain to. The priest would say suffering brings you closer to God. You're not sure if that's true, but you're sure that right now your throat burns from the smoke, your stomach's half full of gluey porridge, and the roof started dripping again. You adjust the reed bundle, then you cough again, always the cough. There's something almost cruel about how familiar the gruel tastes. You're sitting cross-legged on the floor again, bowl in hand, watching the last of the steam rise from what can barely be called food. Barley water? Maybe a pinch of salt if you were lucky, which you weren't. The consistency is somewhere between paste and puddle. You stir it out of habit, not hope. Nothing new is hiding at the bottom. No bits of meat, no rogue carrot, just grey. You take a bite anyway. It's warm. That's its one and only strength. The others eat in silence. Your sister uses a wooden spoon worn so thin at the edges it looks like it might give up and melt. The baby gnaws on a crust of something drooling down his chin. Your brother-in-law scratches his chest and stares into the fire, already resigned to another evening of aching limbs and empty conversation. This isn't dinner, it's maintenance, like shoveling peat into the hearth or patching a leaky roof. Fuel for survival, nothing more. Historians still argue whether gruel was the default meal out of necessity or preference. Some claim it was a staple because it was dependable, grains were easy to store, and boiling water made them safe. Others think it was just the last resort of people who couldn't afford to eat badly in any more exciting way. You tip your bowl and slurp the last of it, letting it slide down like mud off a boot. It sits in your gut with the weight of obligation. You remember a rumour someone once traded an extra egg for a scrap of smoked eel? The whole village buzzed for days. Smoked anything is a rarity. Eel is practically sorcery. You burp softly. It tastes like smoke and sadness. A knock rattles the wooden plank of a door. You freeze. Everyone does. Visitors at this hour mean one of three things: news, trouble, or someone died. Or all three. Your sister opens it a crack. It's just old Hugh. He's lost a chicken and wants to know if it wandered into your yard. He smells like cider and mildew. The baby starts crying again. You shut the door. The reed bundle shifts, letting in a sudden gust. Another leak has started in the roof, this one above your sleeping spot. Typical. You stretch your legs and feel the tug of stiff cloth against cold skin. Your leggings are damp again. You don't remember when they weren't. Laundry isn't a thing here. Clothes are washed if they fall into the river, or if someone dies in them. Even then you might just bury the shirt with the body. You wrap your blanket tighter around your shoulders and glance at the bread shelf. It's empty. The last oatcake was eaten 2 days ago, and the flour bag is closer to memory than matter. Someone suggests tea, you all laugh. Not a joke, just a recognition of fantasy. Tea's for the English anyway. Or monks. You're not either. The wind howls outside, threading its fingers through the walls. You wonder for the 10th time this week if it's possible for wind to be hungry. A fringe detail from the archives in certain Scottish villages, it was common to roast dried seaweed over the fire for flavour. Not nutrition, just something different to chew while staring into the void. You lay your bowl aside and shift closer to the hearth. It crackles gently now, a bit more lively than earlier. The peat must have hit a dry patch. For a few glorious minutes, it even smells less like wet moss and more like toast. You lean in, warmth reaches your face, your eyelids droop. Then the baby coughs, and you're back in the hut in the cold in the evening with nothing to look forward to but morning and more barley. You try not to think about meat. It makes your jaw clench. You last had some 3 months ago. A sheep died, not slaughtered, but keeled over during a storm. Technically it wasn't fit to eat. You ate it anyway. Everyone did. Cooked it long enough to silence the doubts. There's a superstition you remember: never eat meat by candlelight. Something about shadows attracting spirits. Not that anyone here owns a candle. You haven't seen tallow in ages. The priest keeps some, probably to read Latin about damnation. You shuffle toward your bed of straw and linen rags. One of the mice scurries out from under it and stares at you like a roommate. You stare back, too tired to fight for territory. The mouse blinks first. You crawl into the bedding, pull your cloak around your ears and exhale. The wind sighs against the hut again, or maybe it's the roof preparing to cave in. Hard to tell. You rise before the sun, though the sky outside isn't exactly dark or light, it's just grey. A damp, woolly grey that never quite goes away. The fire's out, the air is cold, and your muscles ache as if they've been rolled down a hill and dragged back up again. Today is a work day, but then again, so was yesterday, and tomorrow, and every day that follows unless you're dead, which honestly doesn't sound much less tiring. You shuffle out of the hut into a morning so wet it feels like standing inside a sponge. The mist clings to everything, your face, your clothes, even the sheep. They huddle near the fence, bleating softly, their wool slick and matted with dew. You envy them a little. At least they don't have to till rocky soil for a living. You grab your digging stick and shoulder your sack of seed. It's light. Too light. Which means you either sow sparingly or starve early. The field waits like a sleeping beast, wide and uneven. It's a patchwork of moss rocks and thin soil barely clinging to life. Most of your crops fail not from drought, but from the opposite: too much water, too little drainage. Your rows of barley and oats often look more like amphibian breeding grounds than food sources. You dig anyway, you always dig. Each stroke of the hoe strikes more stone than soil. The clang echoes across the field and into your spine. You pause now and then to flick out a pebble or yank free a weed the size of a cat. Your fingers are already raw, your nails black with grit. You lean into the work with a kind of weary resignation. Farming here isn't hopeful, it's stubborn. You do it because there's no alternative. Because the forest is full of wolves. Because hunting rights belong to the nobles. Because no one survives on dreams. Historians still argue whether medieval Scottish farming was as inefficient as it appears in surviving records, or if we underestimate how resourceful peasant communities were. You'd say both can be true. You're resourceful, but the land fights you every step of the way. You glance at the sky hoping for signs of sun. Nothing but clouds, thick and indifferent. In the distance you see Fergus, your cousin already ahead of you, his cloak flapping as he tosses handfuls of seed. He always moves faster. He also lost 3 toes to frostbite last winter, so maybe he's just trying to keep the circulation going. You wave, he doesn't look up, that's fair. The wind picks up as the morning stretches on. It howls across the field like a wild animal, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and wet wool. It pushes against you, tugs your hood, tries to tip you backward. You plant your feet and keep working, muttering under your breath about the wind having nothing better to do. Your brother-in-law finally appears, carrying the broken-handled rake you meant to fix 2 weeks ago. He looks as thrilled as you feel. You both grunt in greeting, then fall into rhythm. Dig, sow, rake, curse. Repeat. Time passes strangely here. The sun doesn't really rise so much as the grey gets slightly paler. You work until your limbs buzz with fatigue, then stop to drink from the flask tied to your belt. The water's cold, slightly gritty, and tastes faintly of leather. You drink it anyway. A nearby crow caws sharply. You look up, scanning the field. Nothing unusual, just the scarecrow swaying in the wind arms outstretched like it's surrendering to the weather. You keep working. By midday, or what passes for it, in this sullen haze, your hands are swollen and your stomach is empty. You think about the meagre soup waiting back home. Maybe someone remembered to salt it this time. You take a break, sitting on a stump near the fence. A sheep wanders over, bleating pitifully, probably mistaking your tunic for grass. You shoo it away half-heartedly. As you sit there staring out across the patchy fields, you notice the neighbouring plot abandoned for years now. The family that worked it vanished one spring. Some say disease, others say bandits. One theory claims they moved south for better land, but no one ever comes back from better land. You wonder what would happen if you just walked away, left the field, the mud, the smoke, headed for the coast, or the mountains, or nowhere. Then you remember the laird, and his tacksmen, and your sister, and the baby, and the goats. You sigh. A quirky truth: some farmers in medieval Scotland would bury animal bones beneath new crops, believing it helped the plants grow stronger. You did that once too. Buried a chicken skull beneath a barley row. Didn't help, but it felt like doing something. You stand groaning. Your knees creak like ancient doors. The wind picks up again. Of course it does. Back to the dirt. You hear the shouting before you see the men. It starts as a low, angry murmur drifting across the field like the sound of bees in a bottle. Then you catch a name, curse the sharp bark of someone issuing a threat. You straighten up, wiping sweat and mud from your brow with the back of your hand. Fergus is arguing again. Not with you this time, thankfully, but with someone from the McRae clan. You recognise the red plaid, the quick hand on the dagger. This feud's been simmering for months, maybe years, depending on whom you ask. Sheep gone missing, a stolen fishing net, an insult at a feast 3 summers ago. The reasons change, but the tension never does. You quietly slip your digging stick into the soil, standing slowly. Your brother-in-law does the same. You don't speak, but you both move toward the boundary line, the invisible one no one crosses, unless they want to get hurt. The yelling gets louder. Fergus jabs a finger. The other man jabs a knife. It's not drawn, not quite, but close. The wind catches your cloak as you edge nearer. You don't plan to get involved, but you need to be close enough to pull someone back if things tip. That's life here. You never go anywhere without a blade tucked into your belt or boot. Not because you're violent by nature, but because someone else might be. Even a walk to the stream means keeping one eye on the brambles, the trees, and the path behind you. Historians still debate how deep the clan feuds truly ran, whether they were constant violent affairs or more symbolic ritualistic rivalries. What's certain is that grudges ran deeper than rivers, and even minor slights could escalate fast. You've seen it yourself. A spilled drink becomes a black eye, a stolen hen becomes a broken leg. The argument dies down this time. Fergus mutters something about the McRaes being inbred sheep thieves and stomps back across the field. You breathe again. Not today, then. You return to work, but you glance over your shoulder more often now, just in case. That's how it goes. Life here is made up of small tasks and constant wariness. You trust your neighbours, mostly. But you remember who stole that wheel of cheese last winter, even if no one talks about it now. You remember whose cow wandered too far and whose hand reached for it. Feuds don't always end in blood, but they leave marks. Some on land, some on faces. Your own family once got into it with the Stuarts over a boundary stone. You were too young to fight, but old enough to carry messages. You remember running through the heather barefoot, heart pounding, to warn your uncle that men were coming. He laughed, lit a torch, and went out to meet them. The torch wasn't for light, it was a message. You don't know who won that night, only that uncle never came back. A quirky custom. Some villagers believed that tying knots into string and burying it beneath a rival's fence could bind their anger. Others swore by smearing sheep's blood on a doorway to ward off vengeance. You've tried neither, but you keep both in mind. By the time the sun has moved just barely, you've finished your rouse. You stand, stretch your back, and try to shake the feeling that eyes are on you. Probably just Fergus sulking, but still. Your brother-in-law asks if you'll join him tomorrow to fetch thatch for the roof. You say yes. You don't want to, but you say yes. That's how it is. Help is never optional. You sling your sack over your shoulder and head home, boots squelching in rhythm. The wind picks up again, tugging at your hood. It always seems to blow stronger after an argument, as if the land itself heard the threats and wants to sweep them away or fan the flames. When you reach the hut, you duck inside, shaking off the cold like a dog. Your sister looks up. McRae's again, she asks. You nod. She doesn't say more. She doesn't need to. You sit by the fire. It's burning low again, but it's something. The baby is asleep finally. The air is still thick with peat smoke. Your cloak smells like the field. You pull off your boots, peel off your damp socks, and wiggle your toes near the hearth. Someone knocks, harder this time. You freeze. Then a voice, just me. Lost another sheep. It's old Hugh. Again. Maybe he's the one stealing them all, you never know. You open the door anyway, the rain's returned. Of course it has. You've made peace with being dirty. Truly clean is a myth in medieval Scotland. You don't remember the last time your skin felt free of soot or mud. Most days your fingernails are black, your elbows are crusted, and the backs of your knees itch from grit trapped in the fabric of your hose. And yet, no one around you is doing much better. Bathing is rare, voluntary bathing even rarer. You pour a little water from a clay jug into a cracked wooden bowl and splash your face. It's cold enough to make your teeth ache. You rub at the grime on your cheeks until it smears into your beard. You dry your face with a cloth that smells like turnips and smoke. And just like that, you're clean, at least by local standards. There's a stream nearby, of course, but bathing there means stripping down in weather that might kill you before the bacteria do. Plus the water's shared with livestock wild creatures, and the occasional corpse of a drowned sheep. So you mostly wait for summer or fall into the river by accident. That counts. Historians still argue whether medieval Scots actually avoided bathing out of custom or necessity. Some think the cold climate made hygiene a seasonal luxury. Others argue the influence of the church dampened enthusiasm for nakedness, especially communal nakedness. Either way, the result is the same: your odour is your signature. You lift your arm and sniff. Not great, not surprising. Your cloak, which has seen better centuries, is stiff from dried sweat and spattered with something you hope is peat ash. You turn it inside out and hang it by the fire where it'll dry just enough to feel only slightly damp by morning. Someone once told you about nobles in the south who bathed once a month in tubs filled with herbs and wine. You thought it was a joke. Then again, you once saw a travelling friar with lavender stuffed in his sleeves, and he claimed it kept fleas away. You tried it. The fleas stayed. The lavender didn't. There's a superstition in the village: if you scrub too hard, you risk washing away your luck. So most people just scrape with a flat stone or a rough cloth and call it a day, or a month. You scratch your scalp and something tiny scuttles across your fingers. You flick it into the fire with a practiced motion, one of the many invisible passengers you carry around. The hut smells like people, unwashed people, peat smoke and boiled barley. The air is thick with it, the kind of thick that clings to your throat and makes you long for a strong wind to barrel straight through the house. You remember once years ago a summer storm blew the door clean off its hinges. For a full week the place smelled like pine and rain. You almost missed the stink when the door was finally fixed. Almost. Quirky fact. Some Scottish villages used bundles of fragrant herbs like thyme or rosemary as natural scrubbers. You've used bracken once. It works. And it scratches. A lot. Your sister dumps the old dishwater into a bucket and mutters about getting more from the stream. You offer to go instead because your hands are already cold and you might as well lean into it. Outside, the wind has calmed. It's quiet enough to hear the trickle of the nearby stream over the squish of your boots in the moss. You crouch beside the water, cupping your hands. You consider splashing your armpits. You consider washing your socks. You decide against both. You feel the bucket turn and nearly slip on a moss-covered rock. You catch yourself. Barely. You mutter something impolite to the stone and limp back up the slope. In the distance, smoke rises from 3 other huts. Maybe 4. It's hard to tell in the twilight. You imagine each one filled with people who smell just like you. You're not alone in your filth. That helps. A little. Back inside, the fire flares brighter. Someone added dry rushes. The baby's awake and gnawing on a wooden spoon like it owes him money. You place the bucket by the door, sit by the hearth, and wiggle your toes again. You sigh. Being clean is for the rich, for monks, for ghosts. You're none of those things. The first thing you notice is the smell. It's sharp and earthy and oddly sweet, the unmistakable scent of crushed herbs, boiled bark, and something metallic underneath. You wrinkle your nose as you duck through the low doorway into the healer's hut. The air inside is warm, close, and laced with smoke. Not from peat this time, but from a bundle of dried plants smouldering in a clay dish on the floor, supposed to ward off spirits, or flies, maybe both. You've come here for your foot, again. It started as a blister. Then it turned red. Then it started to ooze. Your brother-in-law suggested cutting it open and pouring in salt. Your sister recommended soaking it in sheep's urine. You decided to come here instead, which says a lot. The healer is a woman named Mered. Widow, 60-something. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue. She greets you without looking up her hands, already busy grinding something in a mortar. You nod, removing your boot and unwrapping the makeshift bandage. The cloth peels away with a moist squelch. Mered glances at the wound, huffs through her nose and mutters something about lazy fools who think feet heal themselves. You sit on a stool that wobbles violently. She pours something hot and greenish over your foot. It stings like betrayal. Good, she says, when you wince means it's not dead yet. You don't argue. You're too busy trying not to scream. Historians still argue whether local healers like Mareed were genuine practitioners of folk medicine, or simply the only option left in places with no trained doctors. The truth you suspect is both. She knows which herbs will stop bleeding, which roots will make you sleep, and which mushrooms to never ever touch. She also talks to her cat like it's her apprentice. You're not sure which part makes you feel safer. She begins wrapping your foot with strips of boiled linen. As she works, she offers advice in her usual cheerful tone. Stop walking like you've got a dagger in your shoe. Don't pick at the scab. If it turns black, come back unless your leg falls off first. You thank her. She charges you 2 eggs and a handful of dried nettles. You hand over the eggs, promise the nettles tomorrow, and leave with a limp and a vague feeling you've just survived something ancient. Outside, the clouds have thickened. Again. You consider heading home, but decide to visit the well instead. Maybe fresh water will wash away the last of the burning sensation, or your soul. Either would be an improvement. You pass 3 chickens, one of which is definitely old Hugh's missing bird. It glares at you. You glare back. At the well, you spot a neighbour lowering a bucket. She has the hunched posture of someone who's carried too many pails and heard too few kind words. You nod. She nods. Nobody talks unless there's news. There's no news. You splash water on your face. It's cold and mossy. Tastes faintly of iron. You drink anyway. Back home, the hut is louder than usual. The baby's screaming, your sister's stirring the pot like it insulted her, and your brother-in-law is trying to repair a stool with twine and curses. You sit. You pull your foot onto your lap. You examine the bandage. It's damp again. Whether from the wound or the walk back, you don't know. You lean back and close your eyes, breathing in the scent of peat, barley and boiling cabbage. A quirky tidbit in some parts of Scotland, healers swore by frog broth. Not for drinking, just for soaking cloths to wrap around wounds. Something about drawing out the heat. You've never tried it. You hope Mairead never does. Later the wind picks up and you notice the door rattling in its frame. You reach for a stick and wedge it into the gap. It holds. For now. You stare at the hearth. The fire is low, the shadows stretch. Your foot throbs in time with your heartbeat. You shift your weight, adjust your cloak, and tell yourself the pain means you're still alive. It's not much, but it'll do. Sunday comes whether you're ready or not. You rise stiffly, foot-wrapped, and aching limbs sore from yesterday's fields. The sky's pale and soupy. Rain threatens but hasn't yet committed. A rare kindness. You throw on your slightly drier cloak, adjust the twine belt around your tunic, and prepare for the weekly ritual that's less about salvation and more about survival. Church. The kirk stands a mile or so out, perched on a stony rise like it's judging the village from a safe distance. It's a squat rectangular building with walls thick enough to withstand weather time, and possibly mild siege warfare. Inside it smells of damp wood and old gilt. The walk there is slow, your foot still tender. Your sister and brother-in-law come to bundled in cloaks and scarves and scowls. The baby stays behind with a neighbour. No one wants a crying child in a room full of judgment and Latin. You pass neighbours along the way. No one talks much. Everyone has that same resigned look, we're doing this again and we'd better be seen doing it or else. The kirk bells toll once, though bells is generous. It's a cracked iron triangle someone bangs with a stick. Still it works. The people file in. Inside it's dark. The windows are small, the air colder than the outside, and the benches are plain planks polished smooth by centuries of unwilling backsides. You sit avoiding the spot with the splinter that got you last month. The priest enters. He's a gaunt man with a voice like a crow, sharp and unforgiving. He doesn't smile, he rarely blinks, and he always seems to be looking directly at you when he starts talking about sin. Today's sermon is fire and brimstone again. You've memorised the rhythm by now: sin, hell, sin again, penance, hell again, confession, tithe, tithe, more tithe, and a vague reminder that your suffering is part of God's plan. You nod at appropriate times, everyone does. Historians still argue whether the church in rural Scotland was more controlling than supportive, or if villagers themselves leaned into the fear out of necessity. Either way, you know this missing church means questions, and too many questions can become whispers, and whispers, if loud enough, can ruin a life. You've seen it happen. Last year, an old woman stopped attending for 3 weeks. Said her knees couldn't make the walk. Suddenly no one bought her cheese anymore. A month later, her goat went missing. 2 weeks after that, her roof mysteriously caught fire. The priest gives a particularly vivid description of eternal damnation involving tongues of flame and rats. You glance toward the door and wonder if it's worse than the peat smoke you're breathing every day. Hard to say. Then comes the tithe. Each family steps forward with their offering. Some bring grain, others coins, a few eggs, a scrap of cloth, whatever they can spare. Your brother-in-law offers a small sack of oats. It's a quarter of your total stockpile, but withholding would raise eyebrows. The priest accepts it without thanks. You return to your seat lighter in pocket and heavier in soul. The service ends with a Latin prayer none of you understand. You mumble along anyway. The priest dismisses you with a nod, and the villagers file out, blinking into the pale daylight like cave bats. You stretch your legs and breathe in the wet, mossy air, which somehow feels less oppressive than the air inside. On the way back, your sister mutters about the priest's robe looking new. Your brother-in-law says nothing. You all know better than to speak too loud even outdoors. A quirky truth some villagers believed that if you sat too close to the altar, the spirits of the dead might follow you home. You've always sat near the back, just in case. You pass a field where someone's laid a few wildflowers by a rock. Likely a quiet memorial. No one in the village says the word witch, but everyone thinks it sometimes, especially when crops fail or children fall ill. By the time you get back to the hut, your shoulders are tight, your head's ringing with threats of hellfire, and you're craving barley soup just for something to do with your hands. You stir the fire, you adjust the bandage, you sit in silence and replay the sermon in your head. Your soul might be at risk, but you still have chores to do. The woods are darker than they should be. Even in daylight, the canopy filters the sun into slanted beams and watery shadows. The trunks of ancient trees lean in toward the path like silent watchers, their mossy coats clinging tight, their branches scratching the sky. You step lightly over roots and fallen limbs, ears alert to every crunch, snap, and distant rustle. You're foraging today. Berries if they haven't all been eaten by birds. Maybe mushrooms if you can remember which ones won't kill you. And if you're lucky, something for the stew pot that isn't just more barley. But you never come into the woods lightly. Nobody does. There are animals in here that don't fear humans, boars mostly. Big tusked things that barrel through underbrush like hairy battering rams. Wolves too, though they're quieter, smarter, and always hungry. And then there are the things that aren't quite animals, at least not in the stories. You shift your grip on your foraging basket and glance behind you. Just trees, just wind. But your pace quickens anyway. Historians still debate whether medieval Scots truly feared their forests, or if the danger has been romanticised over time. You'd argue both. The forest feeds you, but it also remembers. Everyone knows someone who went too far in and didn't come back. Some say wild animals, others say something older. A branch snaps nearby. You freeze. It's just a rabbit. Or a pheasant, probably. You exhale and crouch to inspect a small patch of mushrooms. Pale caps, dark gills. You hesitate. You've seen these before. You think they're the kind Mered called witches' buttons, safe in small doses but deadly if boiled too long. You pluck two just in case and tuck them carefully away. Deeper in the woods you find a patch of brambles. You wince as you reach in these ones, fight back, but the berries are plump and dark and worth the blood. You fill half your basket before the thorns bite deep enough to make you swear. You wrap the bleeding finger in a bit of cloth and carry on. A rustle in the undergrowth stops you again. Louder this time. You crouch behind a log. Then you see it a deer. Thin ribs showing eyes wide and wild. It darts between trees and vanishes in a heartbeat. You relax a little. You'd forgotten deer could still exist out here. You head back with your haul, a modest collection of mushrooms, berries, a few dandelion roots, and something leafy that might be edible or might be a laxative. You'll ask Mareed. The sun dips behind clouds again. You adjust your cloak and pick up your pace. The forest silence starts to feel heavier the longer you're in it. You find yourself humming. Not because you want to, but because silence invites things. Old things. Best to keep them at bay with a tune however off-key. A quirky belief among villagers tying a bit of red thread around your wrist could ward off forest spirits. You've done it more than once. Today the thread snapped about halfway into the woods. You'll tie another one tonight. By the time you reach the edge of the forest, you feel like you've escaped something. You step back into the open hills like emerging from a bad dream, blinking against the wind. Your hut sits just where you left it, tilted slightly, smoke curling from the chimney. You smell barley cooking again? Of course. You go around the side, wash your hands in the rain barrel and inspect your harvest. Your sister will frown at the mushrooms. Your brother-in-law will eat them anyway. The baby will try to shove a berry up his nose. Just another evening. Inside, the warmth from the fire is welcome. You unwrap the cloth from your finger and poke at the stew pot with a wooden spoon. It needs salt. It always needs salt. You drop the roots and leaves in a small side pot to boil. Maybe you'll get something tea-like. Maybe poison. Either way, it'll be interesting. Later that night, as you lay on your straw bed, you listen to the wind press against the walls. It sounds almost like it's whispering your name. You tell yourself it's just the wind. It usually is. You've been promised to a girl you've never met. That's how marriage works here. It's less about romance and more about livestock logistics. Your sister tells you the girl's name is Ailys, that she has good teeth, and her family owns 2 goats and a fishing net. You've heard worse combinations. There's a meeting scheduled just after the next market day. Both families will sit on rough benches, pass around something fermented, and nod silently for several hours. If all goes well, there'll be a handshake. If things go very well, there might even be meat. You're not nervous exactly, you're more resigned, like a goat being led somewhere quiet. Marriage is survival here. Alone you're a cold back and a single pair of hands. Together you're a warmer hut, more soup, fewer awkward explanations to the priest. Love. Love is something the bards sing about. You've got no time for rhymes. Historians still argue whether medieval Scottish marriages were more transactional than emotional, or if families simply dressed practicality in the robes of tradition. But what you've seen supports the obvious. The bigger the dowry, the quicker the wedding. Ailys's family lost 2 sons to fever last winter. That leaves them with a few daughters, a few sheep, and a big question: how do we not die this year? You're one part of that answer. A pair of arms, a patched roof, and maybe someday a child or 2 to carry buckets and hoe the rocky soil with you. You sigh and try to scrub the thought from your face. You've met others who married well. Your cousin Ewan, for instance. He and his wife argue constantly, but she makes decent cheese and he hasn't died of loneliness. That's success around here. A quirky tradition at some weddings, villagers would throw grain at the bride and groom not for luck, but because it was mildly funny, and the grain was half rotted anyway. You've seen it done with turnip tops too. Your sister is already sewing something for the occasion. It's not a new tunic, just your old one turned inside out with patches over the patches. She says it looks festive. You believe her, or pretend to. That night you sit by the fire carving a small wooden spoon. You tell yourself it's for the stew pot. But you know you'll end up handing it to Ailys when the day comes. A peace offering. A beginning. The baby reaches for it. You pull it back and hand him a stick instead. He's satisfied. Your brother-in-law asks if you've thought about where the new couple will sleep. You haven't. He shrugs. Maybe build a wall, he says, gesturing vaguely to the far corner of the hut. You both laugh. Walls are luxuries. Privacy even more so. Still, the idea grows in your mind like a stubborn weed. A corner, a curtain, a shared straw bed. It doesn't sound terrible. It sounds survivable. Later, when the fire dims and the hut quiets, you lie awake staring at the ceiling. The thatch is patched with bracken and pine needles. You count the knots in the beams. You wonder what she'll be like. You hope she laughs. You hope she's warm. You hope she doesn't snore louder than the baby. Then the rain begins again, soft at first, then hard. You pull your cloak tighter, close your eyes, and picture 2 goats tied up outside your door, blinking at the weather. A net drying on a pole, a second bowl at the table. Ailys, maybe. You work all summer and the laird takes the best of it. It's not a surprise. It never is. Still, every time the tacksmen arrive on horseback, wearing smugness like a second cloak, you feel your stomach knot. There's something about a man who stays dry year-round that makes you want to throw mud at him. They come in 2s, sometimes 3s, depending on how many villages they plan to drain before sundown. One reads from a parchment, another checks the sacks of grain. The third says nothing but watches everything including your face. You stand by your stack of barley and try not to look angry, or poor, or anything that might tempt an extra levy. They nod, mutter, and decide that your household owes 1/4 of total yield plus the usual poultry. Your sister sighs. Your brother-in-law looks ready to bite through a stick. You try to hide the best turnips beneath a layer of wilted cabbage. They find them anyway. Of course they do. You load the goods onto the laird's cart yourself. Grain eggs a half-wheel of cheese your sister made last week. It's not enough. It's never enough. But you can't argue. Not really. These men carry swords, and what they don't take from the field, they'll take from your ribs if you push back. Historians still argue whether medieval lords in Scotland were exploitative landlords or reluctant middlemen caught between crown and clan. But from where you're standing, knee-deep in mud, and fresh out of options, the difference doesn't matter. The food is gone either way. You try to smile politely. The tacksman nods back. He has good teeth. You hate him just a little. Once they're gone, you take stock. What's left? Not much. A few sacks of barley. A cluster of sad carrots. One duck who keeps pretending she's hiding eggs when she's really just sitting on nothing. You count again. You do the math in your head. Then you stop because it doesn't change anything. Later you stew cabbage leaves and pretend it's soup. You chew slowly and try not to think about the cheese that's halfway to the laird's manor. Maybe he'll eat it with apples. Maybe he'll feed it to his dog. Your brother-in-law sharpens a knife, not because he's planning anything, just because it makes a nice sound. A quirky tradition some villagers used to spit on the ground behind the tacksman's back as a curse. You've done it. Once. It rained immediately afterward. You're not sure if that means it worked or failed. That night you overhear a quiet argument between your sister and her husband. Something about how much grain was taken. Something about what to feed the baby. You stare into the fire and pretend you don't hear. You think of the laird's hall just a day's ride away. Stone walls, a proper roof, probably candles, a table with real legs, not just planks balanced on barrels. You wonder if he ever thinks about the people who fill that table for him. Probably not. You wake the next morning to find your brother-in-law already outside staring at the empty grain bins. He doesn't say anything, just starts digging for potatoes that may or may not be there. You join him, because what else is there to do? The wind picks up again. It always does. You never sleep without a blade. It's not paranoia, it's policy. The knife tucked beneath your bedding isn't for carving turnips or cutting rope. It's for when things go wrong in the middle of the night. And things often do. Tonight, for instance, you wake to the sound of footsteps. Not the soft creak of someone turning over. Not the murmur of the wind. Actual purposeful steps just outside the hut. You freeze. Everyone else is asleep. The baby snores softly in the corner. Your sister mumbles something and rolls over. You sit up slowly, hand sliding under your cloak, until your fingers wrap around the worn hilt of your knife. You listen. Then a thud. Something against the side of the wall. A bucket tipping, or someone leaning too hard. You don't wait to find out. You rise as quietly as the creaky floor allows and step to the door. You don't open it. You just wait. The footsteps fade. You count to 20, then to 30, then let yourself breathe again. This time it was nothing. Probably. A drunk neighbour. A stray animal. But in a place where clan feuds burn low like peat fires and old insults smoulder for generations, you never assume you're safe, not even in your own bed. Historians still argue whether everyday villagers really lived in such constant fear of violence, or if the tales of raids and ambushes reflect isolated incidents. But the truth is, when justice rides on horseback and wears a family crest, a fast knife is your only insurance. You lie back down, but sleep doesn't return quickly. You stare at the ceiling, running your thumb along the blade's edge. Not sharp anymore. It's a kitchen tool that pretends to be a weapon. You keep telling yourself you'll get a real one someday. Something with weight. Something that whispers, "Don't try me." Weapons here are easier to come by than tools. Swords, axes, dirks, all forged and traded by men who sleep with one eye open. You've seen a boy no older than 12 carrying a blade longer than his forearm. No one questioned it. You remember when your cousin was caught without his dagger during a livestock raid. He lost 2 sheep and a toe before the neighbours arrived. No one's made that mistake again. You keep your knife beside you the next morning as you eat, just in case. Even your sister carries one. Not that she says so, but you've seen the leather sheath tucked beneath her apron. And your brother-in-law, he keeps a sharpened nail tied to a stick beside the hearth. Says it's for stirring the fire. You know better. A quirky practice. You once saw a friend of yours carved runes into the handle of his blade, claiming it would bring him luck in a fight. He showed you once proudly. 3 weeks later, he got into an argument over a stolen pig and ended up with a dislocated jaw. You still wonder if he carved the wrong runes. You head into the fields later that day, knife on your belt, eyes scanning the horizon like always. The McRaes haven't made another move, but tensions simmer. You catch sight of someone watching from a hilltop. They vanish before you can wave. Back at the hut, you repair a section of fence. Not because you think it'll stop anyone, but because it slows them, and that's sometimes enough. That night you wrap your knife in cloth and tuck it under your straw bedding again. You close your eyes and listen to the wind rattling the door frame. Maybe tonight no footsteps. Maybe tonight no thuds. But still you grip the hilt, gently thumb resting on the worn edge, and drift off holding it like a friend. Winter doesn't arrive all at once, it creeps. First the mornings turn metallic, your breath puffing in clouds before the sun even rises. Then the ground hardens beneath your boots, cracking like old bone. Finally one day you wake up, and the world is quiet in that terrifying way, like the land itself has gone still. And with it comes the hunger. You gather what's left of the dried herbs, the last of the carrots, a single wrinkled apple hidden in a cloth bag behind the stove. Your sister finds 2 onions. Your brother-in-law comes in holding a turnip like it's a sacred relic. This is what you've got for the week. The stew pot becomes your altar. You place everything inside slowly, reverently, and top it off with water from the snowmelt bucket. You stir with the long wooden spoon, the one with the crack in the handle and the burn mark at the end. The baby watches you like it's magic. Honestly, it might be. Outside, frost clings to every surface. The thatch glitters, the fence posts sweat ice, and even the chickens walk slower as if the cold has reached their bones. One of them doesn't wake up at all. You bury it behind the hut and say nothing. Historians still argue whether medieval Scottish winters were truly harsher than elsewhere in Europe, or if the remoteness and poverty simply made them feel longer. You don't need scrolls to answer that. You just need to wake up with frozen hair. Inside the hut becomes your entire world. You stuff every crack with moss. You hang the cloaks over the walls for insulation. You huddle by the fire, knees drawn up, trying to warm the parts of yourself that feel most like stone. You burn everything. Peat dry dung, bits of old baskets, a chair leg from the broken stool. You almost burn the stool itself, but decide to keep it in case the baby needs a step. A quirky practice, some families kept a ghost log in the hearth. A charred piece of wood from last winter's final fire said to protect the household from freezing spirits. Yours cracked in half last year. You've tied it with string and hope the spirits are sentimental. Nights are worst. The fire dies fast if you don't feed it constantly. But there's nothing left to feed. You take turns waking up, feeding it handfuls of dry reeds, whispering curses at the cold. The baby cries less now. That's not a good sign. Your sister wraps him in every scrap of wool you have. He looks like a bundle of laundry with eyes. He sleeps most of the day. You check his breath every hour. Your brother-in-law builds a windbreak from loose stones outside. It helps. A little. You dream of meat. You dream of warm bread. You dream of sun. Then you wake up teeth chattering and step outside to relieve yourself in the snow. You can see your own footprints from yesterday unmoved. No one else has walked by. You check the traps in the woods, but they're empty. You find an old fox track half covered by new snow. You follow it for a while, mostly just to move your legs. Then you turn back because you know how that story ends. Back at the hut, the fire is out again. Your sister is blowing gently on the last coal. You grab the kindling. Together you coax it back to life. By afternoon, the sky darkens. Already, it's barely lunch. But time is meaningless in winter. There's only light and dark, and most of it is dark. You pass the stew pot again, now reduced to thick grey slop clinging to the bottom. You eat what's left, slowly. Everyone counts their spoonfuls. You offer yours to the baby. He smiles in his sleep. That night, wrapped in 3 cloaks and buried in straw, you wonder if anyone you know has ever truly been warm. You imagine fire that never goes out, a sun that never sets. And then even in the chill you sleep. You're not supposed to enjoy yourself, but sometimes you forget. Tonight is one of those times. It starts with a knock, not the ominous kind. This one is rhythmic, rushed, followed by a familiar voice shouting, "Bring a jug and don't wear your good boots." It's Fergus. You glance at your sister. She shrugs. Your brother-in-law raises an eyebrow, then grabs his patched cloak and his walking stick, more for sitting than support. There's a gathering down by the big hearth in the central hut. It's barely more than 4 walls and a sagging roof, but tonight it feels like a palace. A dozen villagers are already there when you arrive. Someone's managed to light a decent fire big enough that the smoke rises instead of lingering. The air smells of burned peat sweat and something halfway between cider and vinegar. You sit on a bench that may once have been a door. A jug is passed to you. It's strong. It bites. It warms. The laughter starts slow, like kindling catching. Then it spreads. Someone tells a story about a rooster that pecked a priest in the shin during morning prayer. Someone else swears they saw a fox riding a sheep. You know they're lies. That's half the point. Historians still argue whether these informal gatherings were common or rare in such a survival-driven world. But here's what you know. People need each other. Especially when the nights are long and the fire's the only light for miles. Someone pulls out a set of bone dice. Bets are made. Not in coin, you don't have any. But in favours. I'll help you thatch your roof. I'll lend you my net next river trip. I'll cover your turn on watch when the McRaes start pacing again. You lose 2 games and win 1. You gain half a loaf of oat bread and a promise you'll likely never collect. Someone's singing now. The tune is old, the word's even older. It's about a sailor or maybe a sheep. Hard to tell, doesn't matter. A girl claps along. You think it might be Ailís. You don't catch her eye, but you feel the glance. You imagine offering her a mug. You imagine her not spitting in it. These are dreams worth dreaming. The baby is passed from lap to lap content and bundled. He grabs a man's beard and is declared the winner of the evening. Someone brings out a bit of food, dried fish, pickled root, a single boiled egg cut into 4 slices. Everyone gets a bite. Everyone acts like it's a feast. A quirky tradition in some villages, people would write silly curses for each other during winter gatherings. Things like "May your cow never blink," or "May your thatch always leak one drop exactly in your bed." You hear one tonight, you laugh harder than you mean to. You start to forget your blistered hands, the limp in your left leg, the thinness of the roof. For a while the world is just firelight and faces and warm breath in cold air. Your brother-in-law tells a joke so bad even the priest would groan. You nearly choke on your drink. Later someone brings out a small drum, not much more than a skin stretched over a bent frame. But the beat is steady, simple. Your foot taps along before your brain catches up. The wind howls outside, but no one notices. Inside you're full, not of food, not of ale, but of something heavier than laughter and lighter than fear. You don't remember how it ends, only that someone nudges you awake near the hearth, hands you your cloak and sends you into the cold with a pat on the back. You walk home in the dark footsteps, soft in the frost. The stars are out for once, that's rare, and beautiful. Back in the hut, the fire's burned low again. The baby stirs, then settles. Your sister smiles at you, and for once you smile back without sarcasm. You crawl under the straw, pull the blanket up, and let yourself replay the night's soft singing, dice, rattling, fire crackling, and that brief moment of not feeling quite so cold. You fall asleep smiling. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes it does. It starts with a sneeze. You barely notice at first. Just your sister hunched by the hearth, rubbing her nose with the back of her hand. Then the baby coughs deep and rattling like something too big for his tiny lungs is trying to climb out. You glance at your brother-in-law. He doesn't say anything. He just stares at the bubbling pot of turnip broth stirring slowly like he can ward off disease by refusing to acknowledge it. By nightfall, everyone in the hut is coughing. The next morning, 3 more villagers are down. Fergus is missing from the field. Mered the healer has shut herself in and tied a bundle of ash branches across her door, the sign for "Don't come unless you're already dying." You wake with a throat like cracked leather, a fever behind your eyes, and a blanket soaked in sweat. You don't remember pulling it over your head. You don't remember anything after sundown. Historians still debate how quickly illness spread through medieval Scottish villages. Some say it moved like fire, others argue it was slower, more localised. But to you it feels instant. One day you're cold and hungry, the next you're burning from the inside out. There's no medicine, no doctors, just Mered's herbs, a few prayers and blind hope. You try one of her old poultice's moss boiled in vinegar and wrapped in a linen scrap. It stinks. You slap it on your chest anyway. Your sister stops cooking, the fire burns lower, the baby won't eat. You lie on the floor, half-conscious, staring at the beams overhead and counting drips from the roof. Drip, drip, drip. It helps keep the world from spinning. A quirky folk cure you try out of desperation, stuffing chopped garlic into your socks. It doesn't help. It does make the hut smell like stew, which is confusing and cruel. You dream strange things. A goat in a priest's robe. The peat fire talking to you in your father's voice. The roof collapsing and stars falling in like snow. You wake to find the baby quiet. Too quiet. Your sister cradles him near the fire, rocking gently, eyes hollow. You don't ask. You don't need to. You reach for your knife, not to use it, just to hold. Something solid. Something real. Outside the wind howls like it's morning. Inside the air's heavy with smoke sickness and silence. Later Fergus arrives pale and shaking. Says half the McRaes are down. Says their healer ran off to the hills. Says one of the old men bled from his nose until he stopped breathing. You let him talk. Then you hand him the last of the vinegar and tell him to run it back. It probably won't help, but it feels like doing something. That night you press a cool cloth to your sister's forehead. She murmurs something you don't catch, then sleeps. The baby lies wrapped beside her motionless. You don't cry, there's no energy for it. You just sit, watch the fire, and wait for the next cough, the next fever, the next thing to fall apart. Because that's what this is now. Waiting. The judgment comes by fire or by freezing water. Not from priests, not even from the laird, but from neighbours. When something goes wrong, too fast, too unexplainable, someone must be blamed. A bad harvest, a dead child, a missing sheep, a strange rash that spreads across 3 huts in 1 week. Something dark, people say. Something unnatural. And someone always fits the story. This time it's Maren. Quiet, wrinkled Maren who talks to crows and keeps herbs tied above her door. She delivered your cousin's baby 3 years ago. She cured your sister's chest wheeze with boiled dock leaves and fennel. She's old lives alone and sometimes hums to herself in languages no one remembers. So of course it's her. You hear it before you see it. Voices raised. Not angry, not yet. Just loud enough to gather others. Then comes the knock on your hut. It's Fergus. He asks if you're coming up to the kirkyard. You ask why. He doesn't answer. You follow anyway. When you arrive, Merrin's standing in the centre, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the wind. Her hands tremble. Her eyes don't. A circle has formed around her neighbours, friends, people who've eaten her soup, used her salves, kissed her cheek at gatherings. Now they won't meet her eyes. Your stomach turns. Someone suggests she be tested. A bucket is fetched. Cold water drawn from the stream. A long strip of cloth to bind her wrists. The idea is simple, she'll be thrown in. If she floats, she's guilty, rejected by the water as a servant of darkness. If she sinks, she's innocent, and maybe someone will pull her out. Historians still argue whether such ordeals were common in Scotland or imported from elsewhere. Some claim they were rare and symbolic, but you know better. You've seen fear make people forget reason in under 5 minutes. A quirky footnote from Mered once some villagers used dried toads as charms to ward off accusation. Better to carry one in your pocket than be dragged to the stream, she said. No one laughs now. The rope is tied. Merrin doesn't protest. She mutters something soft, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse, and steps forward on her own. You want to shout, you want to stop it. But the weight of the circle presses down like stone. Merrin is lowered into the water. She sinks immediately. Everyone watches. One man wades in, pulls her back. She sputters, coughing, shaking. Innocent, someone mutters. She's innocent. But the damage is done. She's taken home, wrapped in a blanket. Someone says they'll send for Mered. Someone else says maybe she shouldn't live alone anymore. No one says sorry. You walk home in silence. Fergus says nothing either. The wind is sharp. The cold bites through your cloak and into your bones. It makes you feel small, fragile, like rope could be tied around your wrists next. At the hut, the fire's low again. Your sister sleeps, the baby quiet but breathing. You sit by the hearth and watch the flames flicker. You think of Merrin's eyes as she sank, steady, unafraid, like she'd seen this coming all along. You reach for your knife and set it beside you. You sleep with it there just in case, because tonight you trust the shadows more than the villagers. Castles look better from a distance. From the valley floor, the Laird's Hall on the hill appears almost magical. Tall stone walls, narrow slits for windows, a tower that seems to poke the clouds. But up close, it's cold, it's damp, and it smells like boiled meat and old leather. You know this because today you're summoned there. Not invade summoned. A boy rode in at sunrise cloak too large for his bony frame, bearing a message with a wax seal that barely stuck to the parchment. Your name's scratched out at the bottom. No explanation. So you go. The path up to the castle is steep and slick with frost. Your boots slip more than once. You pass the homes of those just slightly better off stone foundations, thatched roofs, that don't leak as much chickens in fenced yards instead of wandering freely into the stew pot. Then the outer wall where a guard eyes you like you might steal a rock. Inside, everything is grey. Stone walls, stone floors, grey lights slanting in through narrow windows. The warmth is better than your hut. At least there's a fireplace in every room, but the air still smells of smoked dog and damp wool. You're told to wait, so you wait. Someone brings you a cup. Warm ale, lightly spiced. You sip it and feel like a king. Then you remember they've already taken your grain, your poultry, and a goat last spring. You set the cup down. Historians still argue whether life inside castles was truly more comfortable, or just differently miserable. Based on the icy draught knifing through this corridor, you're leaning toward the latter. Finally, you're led into the hall. A long room with a high ceiling, flags drooping from beams, and a hearth big enough to roast a pig or 3 peasants standing shoulder to shoulder. The laird sits in a carved chair that's definitely not a throne, but definitely wants to be. He waves you forward. You bow awkwardly. He asks about your fields, your yield, your knowledge of a dispute near the river. Some stones moved some sheep unaccounted for. You answer honestly. You use short sentences. You keep your hands visible. The laird nods. He's not cruel exactly, just disinterested. You're a speck, a voice, a source of barley and manpower when needed. Nothing more. He dismisses you with a curt nod. No thanks, no coin, just that'll do. You're halfway out the door when you hear the barking. Dogs, big ones, lean and restless. A pair of them lunge past teeth bared, chasing something you can't see. A servant steps aside like it happens every day, probably because it does. You pass the kitchens on your way out. The smell of meat nearly stops you in your tracks. Roasted something, you don't care what. Just meat. You glimpse a platter bone stripped clean, a few bits of fat clinging to the edges. A servant tosses it to the dogs. You haven't eaten meat in weeks. A quirky Truth Castle servant sometimes used stale trenchers, Thick slabs of bread used as plates, and once the food was eaten, the greasy bread would be given to the poor, or if too stale to the pigs. You'd take either right now. You leave the castle the same way you arrived, feet aching, head down, stomach louder than your thoughts. Back home, your sister asks how it went. You shrug. Did he give anything? You shake your head. Did he take anything? You nod. And that's castle life, really. It gives you a view, it takes what it wants. The fire is low again, the broth is thinner than ever, but at least it's yours. You wrap your cloak around your shoulders and sit by the hearth staring into the glow. The castle might have meat and dogs and fire, but you have silence. And tonight that's enough. You're 34 today. At least you think so. No one keeps perfect count. Your mother used to scratch marks into the post beside the hearth, but those were lost the year the fire got out of hand, and half the hut had to be rebuilt with bracken and wet thatch. Still you're fairly sure, and around here that makes you one of the elders. You don't feel wise. You feel tired. Your knees creak when you stand. Your back aches even before the day begins. You have 3 teeth that wobble when you chew anything tougher than stewed cabbage. Your left eye's blurry most mornings. Some days it clears up. Other days it doesn't. Your sister jokes you're the young man of the house. She says this while braiding her white-threaded hair and bottle-feeding the baby with boiled oats. You both know it's a joke, but you don't correct her. Outside the cold comes faster now. Autumn barely showed up. One day the leaves turned, the next they fell. Now everything is grey-brown and still. The ground crunches beneath your boots. Not with frost, just dried soil cracking open like old skin. You head out to split firewood. It takes twice as long as it used to. Historians still debate the average lifespan of medieval Scots. Some say 35. Others argue the numbers are skewed by infant mortality. But you've lived enough winters to know this after 30, everything hurts more, heals slower, and no one calls you boy anymore. You carry the logs back to the hut, one arm trembling slightly under the weight. You don't let it show. A neighbour walks by a young lad, maybe 20, with a new tunic and a fresh limp. You nod at him. He nods back. You both know why he limps. A fall during a boar hunt last month. He shouldn't have been out there alone, but no one ever listens the first time. You load the logs by the hearth, stoke the fire, and sit on your usual stool. It groans a little louder under you than it used to. You glance at the pot. Still barley? Of course. A quirky old custom comes to mind on a person's 33rd birthday. Some villages would wrap the honoree in blankets and parade them around the hut 3 times, then offer a spoonful of honey or a dried fig. You've had neither this year. You're not mad. You're just used to it. Your brother-in-law drops a small bundle at your feet. Found this, he mutters. Inside a handful of mushrooms, 2 turnips, and miracle of miracles, a lump of animal fat wrapped in cloth. It might be the best gift you've ever received. That night, your sister stews everything in one pot. She hums as she stirs. The baby claps. The fire glows a little warmer than usual. You eat slowly, savouring the fat melting into the broth. Your teeth protest. You ignore them. For a moment, you let yourself feel full. Not just of food, but of something else memory, maybe. Gratitude. The strange weight of having made it this far. Outside, the wind stirs the thatch. Inside, the shadows stretch long and soft against the walls. You sit back, cloak pulled tight, fingers wrapped around a warm bowl. You're 34. Your joints ache. You've got 5 solid teeth left, and you're still breathing. That's worth something. That's survival. You don't remember the last time someone died quietly. It's never peaceful, not here. Not in this hut, or the one beside it, or the one where old Hugh used to live before his heart gave out mid-sentence while he was cursing a goat. Death here is noisy, messy, and inconvenient. It takes its time. It makes a scene. But when it finally comes, it always leaves the same way, with silence. This morning the baby doesn't wake. You already knew. You felt it in the air last night. Too still. Too calm. Like the world had paused to let a soul pass through. Your sister doesn't cry. Not yet. She wraps him in linen and holds him for a long time. Then she hands him to you. You've held many things. Tools, sacks of grain, chicks' knives, bones, warm bowls of barley. But nothing feels heavier than this. Your brother-in-law digs the hole while you gather stones. The others in the village nod when you pass. No words, just nods. Everyone knows. Everyone has done this. There's a small grove near the edge of the field. That's where he'll rest, among the moss and roots and the low-hanging limbs of a half-dead oak. You dig in silence, the wind blows softly. For once it's not cruel. You place him gently in the ground. The earth is cold. The stones go over the top. You say nothing. Words don't grow food. They don't stop fevers. They don't undo anything. Back at the hut, the fire burns quietly. The pot is empty, the bed is smaller, the shadows longer. You sit. You hold your knife in one hand, a spoon in the other. You don't use either. Your sister curls near the hearth and hums a lullaby to no one. That night, as the wind picks up again, you lie in the dark and listen. Not for footsteps, not for wolves, not for the tacksmen or raiders or your own racing heart. You listen for silence, and this time you find it. You breathe, once, twice, and slowly, gently you let go of the weight in your chest. Because there's nothing more to do. The fire dims, the air cools, and sleep comes not like a thief or a hammer, but like a soft hand resting on your shoulder, guiding you into the dark. And now you rest. You made it through another day in medieval Scotland, a place where the cold seeps into your bones, where hunger shadows every thought, where the fire is your heartbeat, and the knife beneath your cloak is your only law. But now the hut is quiet. The wind outside is just wind, no longer a warning, just a whisper. The hearth glows soft and low, casting golden flickers on the soot-blackened rafters. The straw bed beneath you crinkles faintly as you shift, finding the warmest patch curling tighter into the folds of your cloak. In the distance, an owl calls once and is answered. Nothing stirs. The turnips are boiled, the roof still holds, the bowl is clean, the day is done. Your hands, blistered and aching, rest gently across your chest. Your thoughts slow. The aches fade, not all the way, but enough. Tomorrow will come, and with it more work, more wind, more gruel, but that's for later. Tonight there's only quiet. Let it wrap around you like your cloak. Let the fire warm not just your skin, but your memories. You've survived hunger, illness, grief, cold, and fear. You've lived through the weight of it all. And now you sleep. The wind can knock. The rain can fall. But you're safe for now. Just breathe, just rest, just sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.